An 8-month investigation reveals the president and his family regularly misled and deceived potential investors and buyers in order to profit off their real estate projects. Joining us now is one of the reporters on this investigation, Heather Vogel. She's a reporter for ProPublica in WNYC's Trump Inc. podcast. Heather, thanks so much for being with us. This is a fascinating, really interesting read. Let me just read one part of this out loud. Patterns of deceptive practices occurred in a dozen deals across the globe as the business expanded into international projects, and the Trumps often participated. One common pattern visible in more than half of those transactions was a tendency to misstate key sales numbers. What do you mean by that?
Right, exactly. Thanks so much for having me on. What we found was that what the Trumps were doing was they would go out and they would publicly say things like, in Panama, Ivanka saying, we're more than 90% sold, when in fact they were only 79% at best sold at that point. In Soho, we're 60% sold when they were only 15% sold at that point. Donald Trump at one point was talking about the Fort Lauderdale project, and he said we're pretty much sold out when they were only about 62% sold. So it was, these were statements that were meant to increase the confidence of people who were considering investing or buying in the projects.
They were saying things that were not true and are provably false.
They were demonstrably false.
Let me play you, it's not like they were hiding this at all. In fact, President Trump, then just celebrity Trump, actually did some of this on The Apprentice. Let's watch this.
Honolulu's world-famous Waikiki Beach is one of the most popular tourist destinations on Earth. That's why I'm building the magnificent Trump International Hotel and Tower here. The Trump International Hotel and Tower will feature just over 460 units with state-of-the-art amenities and breathtaking views.
And then he told the Wall Street Journal that this building is largely opened by me and being developed by me, which wasn't true.
That was the other pattern that we saw, was the Trumps representing that they were the developers, that they had a financial stake in these deals. And it gave the impression that they had basically were risking their own money in them, and that they were more involved financially than they were.
So one of the things we know is that when he remade his fortune after losing it all in the casinos and whatnot, it was by licensing, and that was by selling his name, which he would do. He would do, and he made a lot of money off of that, and that's a good business. But then at the same time, he was claiming to have his own money in these buildings. Why was that important for selling things?
Well, that was important because they were trying, these were deals that needed outside investment. And in order for that to happen, you needed two things. You needed buyers, you needed people to commit to buying these buildings, into these buildings, even before they were built. And you also needed lenders. You needed people to lend money, and the lenders would be watching the buyers to see how many people bought into them. So, what the Trumps their job was to go out and drum up the buyers, which is, fine. The problem is that they were saying things that were not true in order to do that.
Or they were lying. If you read your story, you make that case. So, not true, does that mean illegal?
Well, that's a very good question. There were prosecutors in New York that had wanted to indict Trump's children for making some of these misstatements. We spoke with one federal prosecutor who said that the patterns and behaviors we had described bore a resemblance to the elements that he'd seen in fraud prosecutions and fraud investigations. Fraud is not unusual in real estate, unfortunately, but it is illegal. And in this case, there were a lot of people that were hurt.
But they were not prosecuted, have not been prosecuted.
They have not been prosecuted.
And as far as you know, any active efforts to do such?
I don't know anything of any.
And you did bring up the kids there. Ivanka Trump is all through this story you wrote. And we often hear the president inflating numbers to sell things. But what was really interesting was seeing her do the exact same thing. Explain.
I found that very surprising as well, that it was actually Ivanka who was making a lot of these statements. She came into Trump Organization in the mid-2000s, and Panama was supposed to be her baby, her first big deal. And we found quite a few misstatements that she made in promoting that project.
Yeah, we have this right here. In 2008, Ivanka told reporters that 60% of units had sold. This is in the Soho building. The reality, a Trump partner's affidavit revealed that 15% had been sold at the time. The result of that is that building went bankrupt. And it was a similar case in Panama City.
Yeah, I mean, and that was, to me, what was really striking about these deals. That was one of the things that got me interested, is that so many of them failed. They go bankrupt, foreclosure. They were never constructed. They were partially constructed, and it just raised these questions to me of, why is Trump doing this? Why are people partnering with him?
In the New York Times story from a couple weeks ago, really blew a hole in the notion that he was only given $1 million by his father to make his entire fortune. We now know that not to be the case. And this story sort of not blows a hole, but it really draws questions about what he did after the year 2000 and whether or not everything he said about his fortune after that point was true.
Yes, this was a very lucrative way of business model for him. He was making, we know, at least tens of millions of dollars. There's no full public accounting of everything he made from these deals.